privacy is essential in education, and all who work with students who have a duty to protect personally identifiable student information. There are numerous federal and state laws that regulate student data privacy. The Murray City School District takes seriously its moral and legal responsibility to protect student privacy and ensure data security. While it's true that most adults and even teenagers regularly enter personal information into services that may not keep it private or secure, there's a fundamental distinction between this and what happens in an educational setting. Any employee who works with students has an obligation and responsibility to make sure that the student data is protected. As an employee of the Murray City School District, it's important that you understand our district data governance plan and your responsibility in student data privacy. This training will provide you with the information you need to know and to protect yourself as an educator and to protect the personally identifiable student information you have access to.
The training course today is Murray City School District Data Security and Privacy Fundamentals. This is an important training for all teachers and staff of the Murray City School District. My name is Jason Eyre. I'm the Murray City School District Technology Department Coordinator, and also, as a result of some recent legislation, I have also been asked to take on the role of Student Data Privacy Manager. As I've prepared this slideshow, I want to also give thanks to Brooke Anderson, a teaching specialist in the Jordan School District, as she gave me some of the content to help with this today. The objectives of our training today: I would like to define personally identifiable information. I'd like to introduce you to the Student Data Privacy Law and how it defines or extends that definition of personally identifiable information. And then last, I'd like to go over the Murray City School District Security and Data Governance Plans and also the associated forms that we have implemented as a result of the recent changes in the Utah Student Data Privacy Law. And when you think of student data privacy, probably the first thing that comes to mind is FERPA, the federal law that has been in place since 1974. This law states that educational records need to be kept confidential. And in addition to the things you aren't supposed to do with it, it does require that parents are given access to all educational records that are created upon request. And where this law was created back in 1974, a lot has changed since, with information and with the way that it's shared and with the way that it's handled. Back in the day, that would have been filing cabinets and a lot of storage down in the basement, versus today, we have a lot of storage over in the data center. But how does this change when we look at our digital age, and how does this impact student privacy and data rights? So to bring this law up to date, the state passed, in addition to FERPA, the Utah Student Data Privacy Act, which extends the protections that FERPA has and also defines in a little bit more detail and more for our digital age what is personally identifiable information in our day and time and in our electronic world. So to help make this training specific and meaningful, we're going to talk specifically about teachers and their obligations under the law. Teachers are being asked to recognize when apps ask for user information, recognize when the information those apps are asking for is personally identifiable information, get district approval for apps that ask for personally identifiable information, and keep personally identifiable information secure. So let's talk first about how to recognize when apps ask for user information. For example, on the left, you've got a login screen that wants a username and password. Generally, when an account has been created with a username and password, that username in our systems is oftentimes a student ID number, and many times there's also the student's first and last name that's given with that. Those generally together make up personally identifiable information. On the right-hand side, you've got a website that says join the class and put in this class code, and the great thing with that is if they do not put any additional information in, then it isn't asking for personally identifiable information. That's just a general gathering space or a virtual classroom, if you will. But if the student is asked to put in their first or last name so that you can tell who's contributing what in the virtual class, then that changes and is personally identifiable. It's important to realize that it's not just computers, PCs, or Chromebooks that are under this law and under the requirements of our state law. It can be tablet computers, cell phones, even students' personal cell phones if they're being directed by a teacher to access something online. Here's some example of apps that ask for student information. Some of these apps come from the state office. On our list here today, these are ones that we know are in use today at the district. Lexia, Waterford, and Imagine Learning are all used with the state K-3 reading grant, and the state has agreements in place with each of these vendors to get what we call a FERPA exception. At the district, we take care of and manage Google Classroom and Google Drive, as well as Canvas and iReady, and Office 365 is managed a little bit differently, but generally a student has to use their district provided email address, or teachers have to use their district provided email addresses to get access into that system. So each of these systems do ask for information that could identify that student. There are other apps that don't ask for information, and hopefully most of the websites that you're using today as well. You'll see apps from the Smithsonian, Google Earth, the National Library of Virtual Manipulatives run through Utah State. These are just some examples that Brooke had provided when she was putting the PowerPoint together. Now I'd like to help you know what to look for and recognize when information that is being asked for from websites is personally identifiable information. Traditional personally identifiable information on the left side would be their names, first and last, information about their family, their contact information, addresses, so forth. Student ID numbers, whether it's the district or the state ID number, and social security numbers. And probably the most important, because there's multiple federal laws beyond FERPA that reply to it, is health type information, IEP, and 504 information. Now, knowing that we're in more of an electronic age, and to help kind of supplement FERPA with up-to-date information, on the right-hand side you'll see some of the new things that have been brought into place with the student data privacy law. One example is biometric data, social media usernames and aliases, and that's pretty important because it doesn't have to be just the student's name. It could be an alias that they use online. And then the one that kind of makes it a little more difficult because we don't always see it are personal identifiers plus device identifiers, such as you may hear websites asking for cookies, but also tracking data that's used in advertising. So with the law, one of the main questions to ask is, can the app remember who's logging into it? Does it use student data accounts or student user accounts? And is that data saved? For example, could they go from one Chromebook to a different Chromebook and be able to access that same information? It's helpful to recognize the personally identifiable information by looking for full names, school ID numbers or state ID numbers, the social media usernames and aliases. An email address is another example, because even though the email address is a student number in our district, if they were to email that address or get emails from that address, they would see the student's first and last name. And then the personal identifier plus device identifier. And that personal identifier plus device identifier is just as important on tablet devices such as iPads or Kindles. Each of those devices also have a device identifier, and then if a student's name is included or something to help know who that specific person is, that's important. Now, probably the most important thing is the biometrics. They're called, under the state law, authorization only data, and that means in order to use those, that parent consent is required for biometric data. Examples of biometric data, as you may see on the slide here: fingerprints, the eye retina scans, any type of DNA data, any type of data that would be taken through, example of a urine sample or something like that. Now, who is responsible for the applications and compliance with the law? Earlier I mentioned Lexia and some of our K-3 reading grants. Those are applications that are recommended and provided to us by the State Board of Education. And so they are the ones that have statewide use here. There are some applications. We talked about iReady. We talked about Google Classroom. Those are used district-wide, and the district has the responsibility to vet the agreements and vet the vendors on that. You can have school-wide and classroom use apps as well. Unfortunately, with the state law, the burden to prove that they're not asking for personally identifiable information or the requirement to get parental permission or FERPA exception do roll down to the person who's initiating the application in the state law. So it's important with classroom use and school-wide use that you know your rights and your responsibilities with that. To make it as simple as possible, we're encouraging you to get district approval for your apps so that we can make sure we're not making this too complicated or putting you at risk. So here's some just examples. This is a website called Twidla. If you look at the website, it's an online virtual whiteboard. On the right-hand side, you put in a number and get up there and do, as you can see the example here, are some math problems. So notice this does not use usernames, it does not use logins, and after you exit it, it gets erased and there's no saved data. So this would be an example of a site, unless on the right-hand side you're typing in students' names, that would actually not be using personally identifiable information. Keyboarding online requires a student username and a password, although the cookies are deleted at the end of the session. So the student username and password, if it can identify the student and can be used to track down a certain student, then that would be considered personally identifiable information. Nearpod requires a username but no password, but Nearpod does use a device identifier, and it is not cookie based. And so it is asking for some of the information. You've got a student name there with username, and you've got a device identifier, and so that's where that pair of interactions actually makes it so that we need to be careful with those. As we start doing more and more with technology, we're going to start creating more and more data, and that data can be spread out online. It can be used on secure systems here. I like this quote from someone who's a tech investor. He says, the companies that do the best job on managing a user's privacy will be the companies that are ultimately the most successful. And we definitely want to be the most successful here and want to keep this important information about our students safe. Here's just kind of a quick go slow and stop to help you think about as you're looking at applications and what we need to do. You can go if the app does not collect personally identifiable information or if the app is contracted by the state or district. You have to slow down if it collects personally identifiable information, and in our district we're asking you to have the district help desk investigate this app and give you a go ahead or work on the district level to get the information we need for the FERPA exceptions, and also post that out to the state website where we have a data dictionary that shows what's collected and where. Now we need to stop if an app collects authorization only data. That's the data with the biometrics that we mentioned in the slide a couple slides ago. And also that's when you'd have to work through administration to get forms and parent signatures. So those are pretty serious, and I have seen those being used in other districts. It's good that we use apps and help our students, but we need to make sure that those applications, that we know what is happening with them and that we understand what's happening with that data, and that we let our parents know when they send the signature forms home what's happening with that data. So how do you have the district review apps that ask for personally identifiable information? We would like you to use our help desk process. You can file a ticket online at helpdesk.murrayschools.org, or you can send an email to helpdesk@murrayschools.org. When you get to that website, you can log in with the same username and password you use on the network, and the site keeps track of tickets that you filed. If you email it in, the same thing will be stored. Please include the name of the application. If it's an online application, please provide a link to it, and then provide the uses that it provides for your classroom and how it helps you with your teaching. I'd like to change directions a little bit now and talk about the security and data government plans that were put in place as a result of this new state law. And then we're going to actually go into the specifics of an employee non-disclosure assurance, which is required by the data governance plan. And I'll explain to you line by line what the agreeing items are that you'll be asked to initial on the assurance. And at the end of the training through the Safe Schools interface, you'll be able to actually fill this out electronically. So first we have a data governance plan. The data governance plan is actually stored, if you would like to view it, up on the S drive. Underneath the S drive, there's a district share folder, and then inside of that, a data privacy folder. And that's where you'll find both the data governance and the technology security plan. So our data governance plan, just to use its words, is an organizational approach to data and information management. It's formalized into policies and procedures, and it's set up to take the full life cycle from where we acquire data, we use it, and we dispose of it. And we do this in accordance with the Data Protection Act. And that act required us to do that. That act also required that the district put together advisory groups and assign a couple of specific responsibilities. The two responsibilities that have been given to me are the student data manager and the IT system security manager. Those have both been assigned to the district technology coordinator. There's also some responsibilities that are required of the teaching and learning team directors, where they are going to be the point of contact for external research requests and where they provide reports to internal stakeholders. A big part of that are the non-disclosure assurances, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Now, the second major document is the technology security plan, and it goes through and defines a little bit about the different pieces that are involved in our network, what personally identifiable information is, the specific types of security that we need to do, what we need to do to secure our wireless networks. And then it also requires, along with clarifications on our content filtering, that we put together a plan for business continuity and disaster recovery. And we're working on the very specifics with those up here in the technology department. As part of the Appendix A for the data governance plan is the MCSD employee non-disclosure agreement. And I'm going to go through a little bit about what that agreement is and what you're being asked to agree to as part of the assurances in that non-disclosure agreement. So it's broken up into sections. The first section talks about using the district data and reporting systems, that you will only use those systems on password protected computers. You will not share your password. You will lock computers that are unattended. You'll only access data where you have permission. And if you do come across data, especially data that may not have a specific student's name, that you try not to guess which student is being talked about there, or students. And oftentimes we're required, as we start doing things with data in the research world, that we de-identify it. And one of the requirements of FERPA is that we don't re-identify who is being mentioned in a certain data set. Section talks about handling sensitive data. And the commitment here is that you will only keep sensitive data on district-owned computers. If you have printed information out, that those printed files are kept in a locked location, that you not share publicly identifiable information in public presentations or webinars. The suggestion is to actually use fake data or dummy data. And that when you're finished with files, you either delete them or you move them to a secured drive, such as the S drive or the U drive. And the great thing about those drives is, as part of our data governance, we are actually required to back those up. It talks about reporting and data sharing. Here, we ask that you not disclose any of the district's personally identifiable information or data without your supervisor's approval. If you are going to share something for research or other things, that you de-identify the data, and that means take the personal identifiable information out of that. We ask that you do not email screenshots or texts that contain personally identifiable information, that you do not transmit child or staff level data without written authorization. The only approved transport is secured methods, such as SFTP or the SNU drives. And we ask that you report immediately if you suspect a data breach or other type of breach or suspicious activity. There are consequences for non-compliance to the assurances that you're making on this non-disclosure agreement. They could result in the suspension of network access or access to systems here at the district. Failure to report may also subject you to personnel action. And it's important to know that these consequences come both from our plans, but also from the state law. Now, if you do terminate your employment or retire, we ask that you keep information confidential. You will need written permission of the district student data manager to share information after you've left the district. We hope today, as you've gone through the data security and privacy fundamentals, that you will see the value that we are providing to our students by keeping their information personal and making sure we keep it private. We live in a world with data breaches and identity theft and many challenging things happening as we move into an online world together. And we hope that as you'll take the steps that you agree to soon in the non-disclosure agreement, that these will be the best practices that help us make sure that we're doing all we can to protect this and looking out for our students' best interests. I thank you for your time today, and we will continue to do additional trainings and additional deep dives in some of these sections like the FERPA exceptions and so forth. Thank you.